Hello everyone, welcome to our sew along tonight. It's Tuesday at 5 and we're still working on the Economizer quilt, which is my part that I've started on is behind me. We're going to talk a little bit about that and talk about the star block tonight. So just as a reminder, the next couple of little projects we're doing are limited in the number of blocks we're going to do, and so they don't require as much of a time commitment as like the Back to Basics sampler. That one was 28 weeks long. So be sure and invite your friends to watch. They can actually go back and watch all of the Back to Basics sampler posts on our YouTube channel, or they can watch the Economizer project on our YouTube channel. So there's several different sections on our YouTube channel. You can invite your friends to watch from all over the country. And we've gotten a lot of response for the Economizer quilt, which I think is kind of fun. So tonight's block is the star block. And I spent a lot of time today looking for the actual name of the star block. In my head, I call that the 4-patch star, and I'll explain why in just a minute. I'm sure there's probably multiple names for it because as you've probably worked through different kinds of blocks, you may have noticed that there are many kinds of blocks that have more than one name. And so I'm guessing this one probably has more than one name as well. By the way, feel free to post questions or just give us a shout out on our Facebook page or on the YouTube channel post if you get to watch that later. So first of all, I want to talk about why I call this a 4-patch star. In fact, I said it probably should be called double 4-patch star because each segment of this star is made with a 4-patch that includes 2 half squares and 2 solid squares. When you put 4 of them together, it creates that star. So that's why I decided to call it 4-patch star. And I'm sure if you're looking through quilting books, you'll probably find other names for this as well. I even looked in some of the Barbara Brackman's blocks, and I didn't find what her name for it was, but I'm sure she has one. So each section has 2 half squares, 2 solid squares. So we're going to talk about how to make the half squares, how to put this together, how I press it, and that sort of thing. Now, I did want you to notice on my 4-patch stars, I either had a light star with dark backgrounds or a dark star with light brown backgrounds. Of course, you could do whichever you like. But since this quilt was kind of put together with a light block alternating with a dark block, I decided to put my stars together where I definitely had a dark outside or a light outside. So that's why these pieces that are laying in front of me on my table are not put together because I didn't have 4 segments to make a whole star. This is going to be part of a light star that has light on, a dark star that has light on the outside. These pieces will be part of a light star that has dark pieces on the outside. So that is why I decided to do it that way. So I have my plate here of my light and dark fabric. These star sections, this 4-patch, each section finishes 1.5 inches. So that means I add 1 inch to the size of the squares that I cut for my half squares. And so just as a reminder, this is the chart that explains how you know what to add. And I added the little box down at the bottom that says start with squares 1 inch longer than your finished size. So since I want a 1.5 inch finished half square, I've started with 2.5 inch squares. And so that's what I have in this plate. Now, all I'm doing on this particular part is matching up a light and a dark. And I'm not really being fussy about which light and which dark I'm putting together. Let me move this little box over just a little bit so you can see a little more. And then I'm going to on the back side of my square using my Quilter's Magic Wand, and this is the one that I broke in half. I did it on purpose because a lot of the things I make, I don't need this long Quilter's Magic Wand. It gets in my way, so I just broke it in half. So I actually have two pieces that are shorter, and the etched line goes point to point. I'm going to draw a line on both sides, and I'm going to do that with, well, let's just make 4 just because. So I'm going to draw a line on both sides of my magic wand. Now, some of you have done these kinds of half squares before, where the pattern said to draw one line point to point and then use the presser foot as your guide to stitch 1/4 of an inch from that line. Some people have trouble maintaining an accurate seam doing that, and they find it a little easier to just sew right on the line, so they draw both lines on. I'm sure you probably can't see that on the screen, but I can see it, so we'll just go with that. The other ones I think you can see, but this one fabric I think it's going to be hard to see my lines. So I'm just going to stitch right through that. And by the way, I forget that there are new people watching. When I draw my lines on, I draw very lightly, but I actually use a Sharpie marker, this is actually called Le Pen. It's a gel marker, and it's a permanent ink, but I don't mark really dark. And the fabrics I'm using are a little bit on the dark side anyway, so I've never had an issue with my line showing through, but I do pay attention to that, and I make sure that if I'm using a really, really light fabric, I am making my marks really, really light, or I'm using a lighter gel pen. I actually have a 10 pack that had 10 different colors, so I just grab whatever one I think is going to be the least likely to show through my fabric. So I've got my 4 light squares paired up with a dark square, and I'm just going to feed those through. And you can do assembly line sewing. Now, for my project, I'm actually adding 5 4-patch squares. You may decide 4-patch stars. You may decide you want more than that. If you do, for every 4-patch star, you're going to need a square of light and a square of dark times 4, because you're going to have 4 patches for your corners. So for what I'm doing, I actually had to have 20 light squares and 20 dark squares to be able to fill those positions. Now, there's nothing that says yours have to be scrappy. They could all be the same fabric. So that's a total personal preference as well. So once I get, I'm doing 4 tonight, so once I get those stitched through, I could have just turned around. I just parked my needle on my fabric tag. Generally, I just stitch across the end and then go back the other way. So I'm going to stitch the other side, and I'm going to just stitch one to the other, assembly line style. And then when I get to the other end, I'm just going to park my needle. Clip that so when I park it. So now I've got my 4 squares with my double line stitched on. And I'm ready to take these to the ironing board. I'm going to cut them apart and we're going to trim. Let me change camera so you can see what I'm doing. So I have my ironing surface here, and I didn't turn my iron on to get it to start heating, so I'll do that real quick. What I'm going to do with this is cut right down the center. Sometimes I know people press this, and I sometimes do. Usually I don't take the time. I just cut them apart so I can get started with the ironing process. I'm going to put them over on my ironing surface. By the way, if you haven't tried these wool ironing mats, They are really nice. They help hold your fabric still while you're pressing. So it's a little bit easier to keep from over handling your fabric when you're pressing with these wool pressing mats. So let's see, it's getting warm. So I'm going to press, in this case, toward the darker fabric each time. And I give it just a little bit of a finger press before I set the iron down on it. Give it a little bit more time to heat up some more so I can get those nice and crisp. And this is where I would use my Acorn Pressing Pen. Put just a little bit of Acorn Pressing solution on it. Let me get my iron back over here and let it heat up. That is the one drawback of the cordless iron, but it's not always hot when you're ready to use it. It doesn't take a real long time to heat up, except when you're in a hurry like me. But most of the irons on the market today are auto shutoffs, which is a blessing and a curse, because they shut off and you don't have as much of a problem with going off and leaving your iron on. But that means that when you come over to iron something, sometimes they're not hot yet. So that gave it a little bit more time to heat up. Now let me get my Acorn Pressing Pen and put just a little pressing solution. Generally, I just kind of spread them out on my ironing surface and put just a swipe of this pressing solution on all of them. And I can set my iron on several at a time. It makes them nice and flat. If you haven't tried this, you'll be really surprised at what a difference it makes. So I have all of my half squares that I'm using for my 4-patch stars pressed, ready to trim. So this is one of the simplest things you can make with your Tucker trimmer, and I'm going to trim these to 2 inches. Now, I won't be using the half circle to do my trimming. I'm going to turn it around so that I'm using a whole circle. The sizing on the Tucker trimmer is sized from the corners with these circle and half circle icons. That means that all of the sizing on this corner are whole measurements: 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch. All of the sizes on this side are half-inch measurements: 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, and so forth. So all I have to do is put the size, the circle, the whole circle, on the right corner, since I'm right-handed, and then put that diagonal line on my seam. It's not going to leave me a lot to trim away. Sometimes about all I trim away are the ears that I would probably trim off with my scissors anyway. So once I put that diagonal line on my seam, the second time I have a perfectly trimmed 2-inch square. And I'm going to do that with all of my half square units that I made. And I typically just kind of scoot them out of the way and cut up and over. Now, if you're left-handed, all you have to do is turn your tool to the left, and you're going to cut up the left side and across. I am not left-handed, not even a little bit, so I'm not going to try that. What I have discovered, though, here in the quilt shop, a lot of our left-handed friends have learned to adapt to many of our right-handed tools, so they have the ability to cut right-handed or left-handed, which makes me kind of jealous. I would like to be able to do both ways. So once I get all of these trimmed, I'm ready to make my little 4-patch corners that will then turn into my 4-patch stars. And that one, see, I just barely got that ear off of there. I just don't have a whole lot of waste doing it this way, but I certainly have precise units trimming like this. So I had someone post, I'm not sure whether you saw the post, her selection of fabrics for the Economizer quilt. And she had taken a picture with her phone and turned the colors to black and white. That's a great way to see whether you're getting a nice balance of lights and darks. Sometimes we get distracted by color. It's easy to tell, for instance, on this particular half square unit, that this is my light and this is my dark. But some things, when we have two things that are similar in color value or in intensity, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell which is the light and which is the dark, or which is the lighter and which is the darker, which is often what we're really looking for, because it's all relative as to what you put it next to. But taking a picture with your phone and changing the color image or the image to black and white makes it easier to determine where your lights and darks are. So I have my little handy dandy holder of all of my little pieces here. So now I'm ready to take this back to the sewing area and sew some 4 patches. Any questions or comments that I need to deal with? All right. So I have my little 4 patches here, or my little half squares. And now I have a whole plate of 2-inch square, or yes, 2-inch squares, because I trimmed these to 2 inches. I have a whole plate of 2-inch squares that I'm going to match up. Now I just decided that I was going to match up the light square that matches the light in my half square, and then the dark that matches. That's going to be one of my corners. Let me move these out of my way so you can see what I'm talking about. You, of course, can mix and match and make them totally scrappy if you wanted to. For instance, I could put 2 different half squares and another different solid square. I just decided I wanted them to match. So there's one corner. This one has to have a dark that matches this dark and a light that matches my light to go with my 2 half squares. So there's another corner. Here's the next one, and I have my light and my dark. So there's another corner. And then my last one, there's my dark. And truly, when I get to the end of some of my projects, when I'm doing this 4-patch star, sometimes I have to choose to have something that's not the same, just because I run out of all of them. Generally, I have enough extras that it doesn't really present a problem. So now I have 4 of my corners sitting here. Now what I have to determine is, I can put this together to be the light side or to be the dark side. And let me show you what I mean. If I point my 2 dark triangles together and then put together my solid squares like that, that becomes a dark star point with a light background. But if I put my light points together and then put my 2 solid squares with it, that becomes a light point with a dark background. So I basically need to be aware of whether I'm needing a dark corner with light background or a light corner with dark background to complete my star. Now I happen to know that I need 1 more dark background with a light corner, and I need 2 more that are the dark. I'm looking at what I have here before I say that wrong. Nope, that goes with them. I need 2 more that are a dark star point with a light background. So here's one of those, and I need 1 more, and I'm going to use this one. So I've got, back it up so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of planning this before I put it together. because I want to have a specific number of dark points and light backgrounds. So there's 2 of my points that'll match with what I have left. And then this one needs to be a dark background. I have 1 more left that I haven't used yet, and I'm not going to make it tonight because I haven't decided yet whether I need this setup or this setup. So I'm just going to lay those aside for right now, and I'm going to move these over, and I'm going to show you how I stitched these together. I'm going to start with this one. So I want to see it before I sew it. So I've got my... She's only getting some of my words. You might check your devices because mine's indicating that all of our sound is going the way it's supposed to. So I want to lay this out where everything's pointing the way I want it to before I start stitching it. Because sometimes it's easy to get them flipped and then they don't line up the way you want them to. So I'm going to flip the right square over the left square and start stitching. And now I'm going to take the next right square, flip it over the left square, and I laid that there so I know I didn't reverse anything. So that's 1/4 of my star, 1 corner. So I'm going to do another one without cutting in between. Flip the right one over the left one and stitch. I'm using my patchwork foot right along the edge of my fabric. Flip the right over the left, but you want it to look the way your orientation of your colors that you're after before you start stitching. Now here's the next one. Let me move it over here where you can see it. I've got it arranged. This one's the opposite with the light star point and the dark background. The right one gets flipped over the left one. And this is how I do these. I do assembly line sewing. It's more efficient than doing 1 unit at a time, especially when you need 4 of these units to complete a block. And this is not a difficult block to do, but you do have to kind of pay attention to where your pieces are. You can make this block in many, many sizes because you just have to decide what size you want, and then your half square has to match the solid squares that are in your corner units. Now I'm going to leave together in pairs my assembly line sewn pieces so that I know this is part of a block, this is part of a block, and this is part of a block, and I don't have to go searching for it. Also, if I paid attention when I was feeding it through, all I have to do is open this up and flip it together. Now you get to decide at this point how you're going to stitch or how you're going to press those seam allowances. And notice I did not take this to the ironing board. I'm going to flip this over so that my seam is going toward the solid square. I've got it where you can't see what I'm doing. I want my seam to go toward the solid square, so I'm just going to flip it over and buddy them up. The same thing's going to happen on this side. I'm not going toward the half square, I'm going toward the solid square. And you can pin this if you feel a need to, so that those seams go the way you want them to. And I can feel that I've got those nested right here, which is what I want. And I can start stitching that. I have to admit though, I don't generally pin them. I generally just hold on to them till I get them underneath my needle. And then I make sure that my ends are going to match up the way I want them to. And I've got a 1/4 section of my star. The same thing here. I want to press toward my solid square, so you can actually finger press that if you need to. This one's going to go the other way so that those seams nest together. So I know that that's the way I wanted it. I'm going to flip that. And I'll show you, I just nestle those together, hold them with my thumb and my forefinger till I get them underneath the needle. And then I check the end place where they're going to go through the needle last. And I didn't have to pin that. And it'll still be the way I want it. Here I'm going to press toward, just finger press toward the solid square. Do the same thing with this one. And now I'm going to flip those together. I'm going to line up that seam so they nest together and feed through just like that. And I've got 3/4 of my block just in no time. And I'm going to park my needle while I plan what I'm going to do next. Now, at this point, you have to decide how you're going to press this seam. You can choose to press to one side. You can actually twizzle. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clip that cross thread so I can just twist that apart. So all of my seams go around my block like this. This seam goes this way, this seam goes this way, this seam goes this way, and this seam goes this way. That lays down really nice and flat there in the center. So I just finger press it, and I'm going to do the same thing. If you're going to twizzle, you're going to have to cut that ladder thread that I didn't clip when I was stitching those sections together. And just give it a little finger press, and I just stack them up and clip that cross thread. Generally, you should be able to just kind of twist that and get those apart. If you have to, you can take your seam ripper and take out those 2 or 3 stitches that are on the outside there, and that way that breaks down real easily. You can get that apart, and that way your seams go around the center of this 4-patch there. So let's take this to the iron real quick and give those just a little bit of heat and a little pressing solution to help them lay down nice and flat. So I finger pressed them. That I know that the seams are the direction I want them to go. I'm just going to set the iron on them, and I can feel with my fingertips if the seams are going the way I want them to go. Now, I used the Acorn Pressing Pin on the diagonal seam on these 4 half squares, so I didn't use it on the cross seams yet. So I'm just going to go both ways. That'll help it lay down nice and flat. And now I'm ready to press this last one. My quarters are ready to put together a 4-patch star. So we're going back to the iron. I don't see very many comments. Everybody's just watching so quietly. Okay, so I'm ready to put together a whole star. And I already knew, because of what I already had constructed, I had 4 dark star points with white or light backgrounds. Now, at this point, I kind of pay attention. I don't think I want to put my star together that way. I would rather separate those burgundies and blues. That's a total personal preference, though. There's nothing that says I can't have all of my star corners in the same fabric and all of my backgrounds in the same fabric. You can also do matching and matching. That's another way. So you have options for how you're going to put it together. Now, if you have pressed the way that I pressed around my center, this seam right here is going to nest, because this seam is going this way, this seam is going this way. So I don't even really take a whole lot of time pinning, but let me show you where you need to match up. Let's see if I can get this to where it'll focus. All right, where that seam crisscrosses, did you notice I've sewn with pink thread? I don't guess you can probably see that, but that's pink thread. Sometimes I just clean off bobbins as I'm doing chain piecing. So I'm going to pin right into that intersection, and I can peek on the other side and make sure it lined up the way I wanted it to. And then I'm going to pin into that intersection. Then I'm just going to buddy up those 2 pieces, and that pin is my placement pin. And I just keep it inserted in my fabric and put my thumb and a finger close to the pin so it doesn't bend. I don't want to just take this pin and shift it and poke it in. because if I do that, I automatically shift the back layer where they're not lined up anymore. So I want to have those buried together, and I'm going to grab another pin and slide that in right next to my placement pin. That way I know that I've still got those 2 points that I wanted to match up meeting. And now I'm going to stitch across this way. Now the next 2 that go together are these 2. These should nest if you press the way I press, because this seam goes this way, this seam goes this way. So I'm just going to lay them, and I also want to notice I've got my blues opposite each other. Let me move that back where you can see it. My blues are going to be opposite each other, and my burgundies are going to be opposite each other. This flips together. Now, because of the way I pinned it, I can't see right here that intersection, but I know it's 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I can insert the pin and then check it to make sure I'm where I want to be, and I am. So then under here, I can insert my pin into that. I'm matching up where those half squares come to a point. And again, that's my placement pin, because I can't see that point where I want that needle to go. When I insert my pin to hold everything in place, I try to insert it right where I want to stitch. That way it helps me when I come back and do the next seam. And I'm going to stitch right into that, line that up, and park my needle, and let's see how it looks. See if it came out where I want it to. Get rid of my pins now, and that's where I want my 2 pieces to come together. Pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good. That didn't meet as well, but I don't know if you can see that. You have to determine at this point, if it bugs you so bad that you need to fix it, you need to fix it now. I'm going to go on, because now this time I'm going to flip this over, but I have to decide what I'm going to do about this seam. There's about an equal amount of bulk if I press this way as there is if I press this way. The other option is to press your cross seams open, which you could do. There we go. It didn't want to come open. If you're going to do that, give it a little finger press like this. And I generally don't take this block to the iron till I get that whole thing together. And I think I am going to open that seam. So I'm just going to grab this. There we go. My fingers don't want to grab it. And then I'm going to finger press that seam open. Now I've still got a ladder of thread there holding my block together, so I know I'm still in the right order. And this seam, I'm going to pin right into the seam, 1/4 of an inch from the edge and 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then I'm going to buddy up the edges where they match. You want that pin to come out right on that seam, and you want it to be inserted right on the seam. And I'm going to match that up and slide my pin in so that this one stabilizes, this one fixes it where I can match them up. And here, the same thing, I want right at this intersection where the seams crisscross, and right at that intersection. I'm going to buddy those together, keep my pin perpendicular to the fabric, and slide this one in to hold everything in place. Then do the same thing here. I'm 1/4 of an inch on the inside, and check and make sure that it matches. I don't know that you can see that, but it does. I think it's better now where the pin is, where you can see it. And now I'm going to pin right into that intersection, and I'm going to line this up and slide my pin in, and I can take out my placement pin. So once I get that done, I want to make sure that I'm ready to go right along the edge. My needle needs to come right to that intersection here, and then right to where I pinned in. That keeps my two seams together. Then right here where that pin is inserted is where I want to land with my needle to make sure that I'm lined up. And when I pin, that's why I pin, to make things match up the way I want them to. So once I get that, I've got my 3 pins that I used. I can take those out, and then we can check it and make sure it lined up the way I wanted it to. So I have my 4 corners coming together here. I have my half squares coming together there, and then I'm ready to take this to the ironing board. Now, of course, you have to cut that ladder across in order to be able to open up this seam. And then I would just give it a little finger press here, and then your block is complete. So that's a 6-inch double 4-patch star, or a 4-patch star. Either way, if you call it a 4-patch star, you're not incorrect. If you call it a double 4-patch star, you're still correct. So I did make a comment that you could use all the same fabric for your stars if you wanted to. There is a way to do, I also said you would need 8 half squares for each star. I can make 8 half squares at one time. And this is a technique that you can get a technique sheet for. Let me go over to here so you can see a little better. This is called 8 at once. This is one of Deb's technique sheets for Tucker trimmer. So by the way, up in the corner it'll tell you what tool that technique sheet is designed for, and it gives you a level of difficulty indicator here in the corner. So that is something you could do if you wanted to make a bunch of stars that are all the same. And I have prepared a couple of squares just to show you. Now on your technique sheet it gives you the process. It also gives you sizing information. So if I wanted to make this size half square, since it's a 1.5 inch finished square, I would need to add 1 inch, just like the chart says. So this is 1.5 inch finished. I add 1 inch and I start with a 2.5 inch square. In order to do this technique, I just double that. So instead of a 2.5 inch square, I have a 5 inch square. So I have my square of light and dark. This is not going in this project. I just grabbed a couple of squares to play with. Now I'm going to need to draw a cross, and notice my broken Quilter's Magic Wand is not long enough to reach across there. So I've got to have the real deal whole thing. So I've got my Quilter's Magic Wand, and I'm going to draw 2 lines using the etched line from point to point. I'm going to draw across and across. Then I'm going to turn and do the same thing the opposite direction. Draw across and across. And then once I get that done, I'm going to buddy up my squares. And my 2 squares, my light and dark square, have to be the same color. So I'm going to go right here. I'm going to stitch on my lines. And I have 4 lines to stitch on. When I get to here, I'm just going to turn, sew across to the other side. Oh, thank you. Tony said all you can see is my thumbs. So I'm going to stitch across here. Now, of course, if I'm assembly line sewing, I would have another 5 inch square already prepared to add, but I'm just doing one for tonight. Now I'm going to go the opposite direction. I've sewn 2 lines across this way, now I'm coming this way. So I'm stitching across my line and turn, stitch across the end. This is just a quick and efficient way of making a lot of half squares, especially if you're making several that are the same color combination. So once I get that done, I'm ready to cut. Now normally when we do half squares, we cut between our 2 stitching lines. On this particular one, we have a couple of other places to cut. And I drew some dashed lines on here so you could see. don't know how well you can see it. Not only are you going to cut between your lines of stitching, you're going to cut north and south and east and west right across those two intersections. So let me show you. I'll just grab something to use as a cutting guide. Don't use your magic wand. It's not big enough to protect your fingers. So I'm going to cut north and south right between those intersections. You get this where it maybe will focus a little better. And then I want to go the opposite direction, and I'm aiming for those intersections, I'll show you, right where the stitching meets. Now I'm going to take each one of these segments and cut between the lines. That one. And I will tell you, this is not how I did mine because I wanted mine to be there to be more variety in my combinations. This is only helpful if you want several of the same combination. So that gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 half square units ready to press and trim. So this is called 8 at once. It's a technique sheet that you can get. We have this one as well as all of her other ones that you can get here from the shop. So for this week, you're going to be making the 4-patch star to go in your Economizer quilt. And I started putting my rows together. You can actually wait till you get all your blocks done. And that's what we were talking about. And I was texting back and forth with the, oh my goodness, I can't remember. What I said was, you don't have to have all of your fabrics when you start the Economizer quilt, especially if you're going to do a stack of your stacked squares blocks and a stack of star blocks. Then you can put them together later, and if you see one that you're lacking and you don't have enough of a specific color, or maybe you need some that are brighter or some that are darker, you could add more before you start putting blocks together. Because it just takes a stack of fat quarters. I'm going to end up with more blocks than I probably need for the project, but that'll be fine. And that could be a pillow, it could be a pillowcase. I could make my quilt bigger. So I actually have in mind to do, I think I have in mind to do 7 rows by 9 rows. I may actually make it bigger than that, but that's where I'm going to start. So if I get my 7 by 9 done, I could actually add another row up and across to make it bigger without having to take things apart, because I started with the fabrics that I want to use for my project. If you have to add more fabric to make your project bigger, you want to make sure that you add things that you've already got in there so you don't end up with new fabric just on one row of your quilt, because that might be noticeable. So next week I'll have another, I'm not going to necessarily quick project, another basic project. It's going to use the Tucker trimmer and the wing clipper, a single block that you can make several times over and over and over. And I'm going to actually use some Civil War type fabrics, but you could use any style you like. You could use batiks, you could use Tula Pink, you could use K-Facet. It's going to be a scrappy quilt as well. So until next week, happy sewing. Come and see us. We have lots of new fabrics, lots of new batiks. Check out our Instagram, because that's where I post new fabric pictures. For some reason today they all ended up on Facebook too, so I'm not sure what I did. It's a new world every day. So you may be able to see our new fabrics on Facebook from now on. Who really knows? So happy sewing. We'll see you next week live at 5.